like a good number of participants has joined us, so I guess we can begin at least with the preliminaries. So, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to this webinar hosted by the WINS network around climate resilient wash in schools. And please note that this session is going to be recorded. So, in case you don't want to be seen in the recording, please feel free to switch off your camera. And yeah, so then if you just joined us, again, may I invite you to please scan the QR code, which you see on the screen, or go into slido.com and type the code, which you see 1796977, and let us know where you're joining us from. I hope you can hear me well, and great to see all of those who are also actively joining, typing in the chat. So all throughout the session, this session, the WINS Network webinars series is entitled Chat, Listen, Exchange. So that's because we encourage a lot of exchange and input from all of you. So I'm Marge Lim, and I have the pleasure of introducing the WINS Network for today. And I am part of the WINS Network Secretariat. And well, first, the WINS Network is an informal group of organizations that it's an informal interagency network that aims to bring together various organizations that share a common vision of supporting ministries of education on improving wash in school services and reaching the SDG goals on WASH. And we aim to bring together these organizations to ensure alignment among these organizations and to align efforts across various development partners and NGOs by focusing on the working streams, which you see on the screen. So the WINS Network is working on supporting advocacy, system strengthening, monitoring and evaluation, research, guidance on WINS programming, mainstreaming gender inclusion, and also equity principles, and knowledge management, capacity development, and learning and exchange, like what we're having today. So speaking of knowledge management, you will see a lot of resources on the WINS Network website. That's winsnetwork.org. And if you want to receive updates from our side on what events, what resources are made available on the WINS Network, we also send out emails. So please to all our members. So if you're wondering how to become a member, please, you may scan this QR code, and this will lead you to a very short registration sheet where you just let us know a few background information about yourself, and you'll now be part of our mailing list. So that's it. And for the rest of the session, may I invite all of you to let us know your questions, your reactions, input in the chat. And at this point, I will now hand over to our moderator, Belinda, which many of you here I'm sure will know. And she's an expert in the field of international development with over 20 years of experience in the intersection of WASH and education sectors in Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. And she's currently supporting the WASH in Schools Network Secretariat. So over to you, Belinda.
Great. Thank you, Marge, for the introduction. And again, welcoming everybody. It's great to see so many different countries that have joined us today. So great to have you all. Hopefully, wherever you are, it's good weather and all is well. So today, I think we got a packed agenda with lots of hopefully good exchanges. And again, as Marge mentioned before, we call these webinars Chat, Listen, and Exchange for that very reason. This is to be an exchange between professionals, particularly persons of the ministries and development partners. So we do really welcome you to either use the chat function, or during the sessions that we have Q&A, you are more than welcome to share, even from the perspective of the country that you're coming from. So we've just gone through the opening session. Now we're going to go into the introduction section, which will be a presentation by Jose, which I'll introduce more formally in a minute. And then we will focus, that first presentation will focus on really key definitions, really grounding us on what climate resilient winds means. Oftentimes terminology is switched around. So really for us to understand, and we kind of all give us a basis. I think you always can learn something there, but it's quite informative. Then we'll go into a reaction section, and we've got a reactor today, Henning, who will give us some sort of insights, and then we'll open it for some questions and discussions. Then we go straight into the next one, which is a bit more technical on the framework, and I think this is very key, particularly for institutions, to understand sort of what is the global guidance on how to integrate climate resilient winds. Then we will have, hopefully, I have to check and see that they're with us, some perspectives from the education sector. We're hoping that we have Maurice Mando from Kenya to give some insights. And I think we can also pull on Bella if it's possible to give some insights on Philippines. And I do see there are some others from Philippines, so very much welcome to hear from you or from which other countries that may be represented. So if you are from Ministry of Education, please put it in the chat box. We'd love to welcome your insights and perspectives on what your country is doing. And then again, opened up for some reactions from Henning, more questions, and then we sort of close it out. Great. So with that, let's begin. So just again, since you guys all have your phone out, maybe you can just give us, when you think of climate resilient winds, what kind of words come to you? So this is everybody's chance to kind of, we're going to go into some definitions, but perhaps maybe what words come to you when you think of climate resilient winds? It's open. I'll just give a few minutes. Nice. So we see sustainability, sustainable access, sustainability again, or sustainable adaptation, closed circle, interesting, climate resilience standards for infrastructure, again, sustain over time, security, great. Keep those words coming. Disaster proof, very good. I can just check here quickly if there are more. Yeah, great. We see also, again, climate, okay, proof, functionality, more disaster, functional after disasters. Very good. Safety, resistance. Yeah, responsible waste management. Yes, so the responsibility side of that. Great. Adaptation. Again, great. So we'll keep the quality of water, very important. These are all very important things as we will go into this, probably more with the discussion. But if you still, it's still open. Environmental education, excellent. Good. So we will move to the next slide. Good. So thank you. You can still keep those words coming. We'll keep that word cloud, and you can also see the outcomes. And really, I think Jose will put it all into picture. But I think those kind of words that come are really are probably very very much connected to this. So so would love to introduce Jose Canuto. He is as a climate advisor providing support in policy and strategy, and especially around country engagement around climate action, water supply, and sanitation. So it's a great combination to have both the climate action and the WASH. He's previously, as many of you know, worked with UNICEF as the chief of WASH in the office in Jordan, and he's also been advisor to UNICEF headquarters. Prior to that, he did work in the ministry supporting the River Basin Authority. He is a Spanish national who has both studied in the US and in Spain with an engineering background. So very pleased to have him with us today. And joining him as a reactor is Henning Sandberg. And Henning is a program manager with the water and sanitation team in Siwi, Stockholm. He specializes in water governance, climate resilient wash in schools. He's currently managing this Siwi partnership with UNICEF in South and East and Asia and South in the Pacific, supporting countries to improve the enabling environments and services around WASH. So he's very much supporting government and key stakeholders. And so I think he will bring, again, a lots of wealth of kind of knowledge and reflections on the subject. And again, particularly around the solutions, how countries are putting in together frameworks for solutions to reduce exposure, vulnerability to climate hazards. And at the end, getting a more climate resilient wins. So with that, I think I will stop presenting. And now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Belinda.
Welcome, guys.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much for the introductions, Belinda. And great to be doing this in tandem with Henning as well. So I will share now my screen and we will go right away into the first presentation that, as you have mentioned, when you were describing the agenda, Belinda, aims at setting a little bit the foundation for this discussion with some very straightforward, excuse me, definitions, which hopefully will also, if we could run again this exercise with the wording, maybe we will help spice a little bit the wording that we get when we do this survey. But very interesting to see some of the words already there in this poll that we have just launched. When we talk about climate change and we start the conversation from the very beginning, it's good. You may think that this is a little bit too fundamental, but it's good. And I have, in my experience, when doing this, I get good feedback because it's good that before we jump into climate change, we do reflect into what is climate. And therefore, we better understand when the climate is changing. And to go into discussing what is climate, actually, we have to take one step backwards and start by talking about what is the weather. So let's talk about these three concepts first, right? The weather, as you can see in the slide, is an atmospheric condition at any given time or place. And as you know, the weather is measured in terms such as the wind, the temperature, humidity, the atmospheric pressure, cloudiness, etc. Right? There are different things that we can measure. As we know, the weather can change from hour to hour, from day to day, and from season to season. The difference between, we will go now into what is the difference between weather and climate, because climate, in a narrow sense, or in a more basic way, is defined as the average weather, right? So we say that the weather may change from day to day. And now when we talk about climate, we have to average the weather, right? In a more rigorous way, the climate is defined as a statistical description in terms of the mean and variability of relevant quantities over a period of time that it ranges from months to thousands or millions of years. So we say that the climate is the average weather. The classical period to make this average is a period of 30 years as defined by the World Meteorological Organization. So the weather changes day by day. The climate, we need to average in periods of 30 years to compare. And that's when we say that the climate may be changing or not. So with this background, we are then ready to discuss more about climate change, right? So climate change, there are different definitions on the table. Right now, we focus on the one given by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is abbreviated as the UNFCCC. And the UNFCCC refers to climate change as a change of climate that is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity, and that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, and that is in addition to natural climate variability observed or comparable over periods of time. Okay, so we've now got a little bit of a better idea of when can we talk about the climate changing. Other definitions, important definitions that set the background to this conversation are the climate hazards. The climate hazards are the droughts, the floods, the sea level rise, strong storms, etc. Vulnerability as well is a key concept, which is the degree to which a system or a community is susceptible to harm due to the exposure to these climate hazards that we are describing. And yet another key element or definition here in this conversation is the concept of risk. In our case, climate risk, right? So climate risk, we use the concept of saying that it's a combination of the hazards that we are describing, exposure levels, who and what is exposed to the climate hazards, and the vulnerability that we have just defined, right? So these are key concepts that we need to bear in mind when we are having a conversation like this one. Let me pass this slide. Okay. So climate change is already having an impact on the access and the cost and the quality and the sustainability, some of the things that you have already mentioned in the poll. It's having an impact on all these things as they relate to WAS services for households, for schools, for healthcare facilities, etc. The table on the left explains for each climate hazard what are the impacts on water sanitation and hygiene services. Water-related climate risk arise normally from too much water or too little water or polluted water. And climate change also affects the access to and functionality of sanitation facilities and services, and also, as we know, the practice of key hygiene behaviors. If there is no water, it's difficult that we call for practicing hand washing practices, right? On the right, what we're trying to illustrate, and I reckon that it's a little bit small, is how climate change affects children, both directly and indirectly in many different ways. From the more obvious ones, such as dehydration and malnutrition, right through the reduction in sanitation and hygiene practices, as we were mentioning, reductions in water quality that you have mentioned in the poll, which of course, all of this leads to an increase of vector-borne and infectious diseases. So we have seen how climate change impacts WAS services, how that translates into impacts on children, and also we can extend the conversation to how climate change, therefore, is impacting WAS in schools programs. Extreme weather events such as floods destroy and disrupt sanitation facilities. This is compromising attendance. The lack of water in a school during droughts and increasing periods of droughts disrupts hygiene practices, as we are discussing, impairs children's attention and difficult meal preparation. And the lack of reliable and resilient water supply in their communities forces children to walk longer distances. So what we see is that when they get to school, they are distracted, they are too tired, and they cannot concentrate on the lessons. So climate change, therefore, we can conclude impacts WAS in schools. It therefore impacts learning activities and health. So we see, again, coming back to the definitions, the climate change responses are basically two, right? One is the mitigation, and the other line of action is adaptation. You may know that mitigation, climate mitigation, refers to technological solutions that help with the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions. Examples are renewable energy, such as solar energy, but also increased energy efficiency, waste minimization, which was also mentioned in the poll, the composting of organic waste. These are things that help us address the climate change at its root, which is the release of greenhouse gases emissions. The other line of action is adaptation, right? Bearing in mind that even though we cut greenhouse gases emissions, we will still need to adapt to climate change. Examples of this will be the siting of latrines in relation to flooding areas, the centralized sanitation systems that minimize impact of local flooding, diversification of water supply options so that we don't rely just on one water supply, increase water storage, etc. Here, it's important to mention, as we're talking about climate resilient WASP programming in schools, is the concept of children as agents of change. What they learn in school, they take it to their community. They are the politicians of the future, right? So it is very important that we scale up climate resilient water, sanitation, and hygiene programming in schools because of the repercussions of working, the positive repercussions of working with children as agents of change. Then, we're keeping towards the end, but let's bear in mind now that we've seen what climate change is and how it's impacting WAS in schools programming, what are the objectives of working with climate resilience in WINS? The first one is ensuring that the WAS facilities and services are sustainable. You mentioned that in the poll. They are safe and they are resilient to the climate impacts. This is one. The second objective is to make sure that that the resilient WAS systems contribute to build community resilience and to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And the third key objective is to make sure that we work and contribute to a carbon neutral water sanitation and hygiene sector. I will finalize this background presentation by saying that how is WINS reflected in the Sustainable Development Agenda. Mostly, your colleagues will be coming from education ministries and stakeholders and agencies working with education and stakeholders working in water sanitation and hygiene. But let's also bring up, so therefore you are aware of SDGs 4 and 6, but let's bring into the conversation SDG 13 that calls for taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And I just want to highlight that there is a specific target within SDG 13 that calls for improving education, awareness raising, and human and institutional capacity on climate change mitigation, adaptation, and impact reduction and early warning, with a specific indicator that calls for bringing into students' curricula all these things that we're discussing here. I think for the moment I will leave it here and get back to you. I think we will have now Henning sharing his reflections, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for a great presentation. There's a lot of things happening in the chat box, and I see there's also hands and claps. So applause, applause, applause for the first section. Henning, over to you. Some reactions on what has been presented, at least in terms of the definitions, and if you maybe can take the question, or at least some of the question on in context of, are there things for schools? I think that's leading to the last one, if you know of them. Yeah. So over to you, please.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that presentation, Jose. I think that was a really great introduction to what is climate change, what is climate change in the context of WASH in schools. And as we have seen, if we're going to achieve universal access to WASH services, which is the goal of the Sustainable Development Goals, we also need to take into account learning centers, schools, education centers. And we have seen that these are important concepts in Sustainable Development Goal 13 that Jose mentioned now. But for us in the education sector, it's the Sustainable Development Goal 4A, which is our Sustainable Development Goal. And then we also have Sustainable Development Goal 6.1 and 6.2, which is the WASH Sustainable Development Goal. And we have seen how this is important in terms of school attendance and also being healthy in school and being able to have quality learning in school. So WASH in schools and climate resilient WASH in schools is absolutely essential for quality education. I wanted to pick up on this point of accountability and ownership over Sustainable Development Goal 4 in particular. We in the education sector, we need to take the leadership of this Sustainable Development Goal. It's our Sustainable Development Goal, and we need to have ownership of this, and we need to ensure that there is accountability for this Sustainable Development Goal being achieved. When we bring in this topic of washing schools and climate resilience, we bring in other sectors as well, right? We bring in the wash sector, but we also bring in sectors such as water resources, climate change, and environment. So it's very important for us in the education sector to take the lead on this, but also to understand the existing institutional fragmentation that results from having this cross-cutting nature of climate change, all right? So it is up to us in the education sector to take the lead on washing schools, on climate resilient washing schools and SDG 4, and understand this institutional fragmentation and take leadership on this aspect. We need to understand what is the status of cooperation between the wash sector and between the climate change and environment sectors in order for us to be able to address climate resilient washing schools at all. And we need to understand and assess the water governance gap that exists. Where is the accountability for climate resilient washing schools? How can we cooperate with the wash sector? How can we cooperate with the water resources sector, with the climate change sector, with the environment sector? And we have to take the leadership on this. We have to understand the cross-cutting nature of climate change. We have to understand that it is up to us to take the leadership on SDG 4. So I think I will just one quick mention as well on the focus on climate resilient washing schools in the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. CWE has done a review of NDCs just to look at to what extent is WASH included in these nationally determined contributions, and how is washing schools, climate resilient washing schools, included here. And we have found that in 45% of the enhanced NDCs, there are mentions of WASH, but WASH in schools is largely absent, and it's often mentioned in a very general way. So there are very few measurable or quantifiable targets for climate resilient washing schools in the NDCs, either for adaptation or for mitigation. And this is a big barrier for securing a common understanding of climate resilient washing schools on the country level, at the regional level, and at the local level. It also means that we don't have a good understanding and agreement of what we need to do, and it might also be a barrier for securing climate financing for climate resilient washing schools. Again, as the education sector, we need to take the lead to ensure that climate resilient washing schools is a priority and included in the NDCs as a priority for the country for the next foreseeable future. So that is what I wanted to say in terms of my reaction to Jose's first presentation. I will be back later on. I saw that there was a question on resources for children on climate change. I am not an expert on this, so I would welcome if there are any country representatives that have any experience or developed their own resources for schools in this. But I'll hand over to you, Belinda. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Henning. And I probably, if you like from your point, you're saying that a lot of the NDCs, the national determined contributions, don't actually include WASH in schools. That kind of trickles down to what is actually going to influence the curriculum and how the overall kind of policy governance framework is. So it is likely that if it's not at that level, it's likely not. Do you want to ask your question, if it's the same question as before, or is this another question?
Yeah, it's a little bit different. Actually,
okay,
first of all, thank you so much for offering this opportunity. Climate resilient was in school. This terminology, I can understand it, two things from it. First thing is that the service providers must ensure that whatever the facilities are there in the schools, it has to be climate resilient. That is one way of seeing it. And the other thing is that the children should inculcate that practice. There should be a change in their behavior so that they can learn and then take it forward to the community. So my question is that, okay, from the service provider point of view, we may ensure the facilities, but how to inculcate that practices among the children? The same thing, a little bit what I asked in the chat box about the toolkits. How to ensure the change in their practice so that they can understand, okay, what is carbon sink, and then what is the means what steps we need to take forward.
Thank you. Your
Over to
question
you.
is perfect. Your question is perfect because it leads us directly into the next part where we start to look at the actual frameworks and what schools can start to do. So I think this is the perfect segue. Couldn't have done it better. Over back to you, Jose.
Thanks, Belinda. Indeed, this question is a real good entry point to what we are going to be presenting now. And I have taken note of the question, so I will specifically try to, as we go, address this in our discussion. And I'm sure that Henning is also taking good notes to also spice whatever I say later during the discussion. Let me then do again the same thing, magic that we've done before, to share my screen quickly so that we don't lose time. And then we have this second presentation now that tried to unpack a little bit how global guidance is being framed now to help us all understand better what are the practical steps that we can take to integrate climate resilience into what's in schools programming, right? Let me just see so that I can consume my time. Yeah, perfect. I just want to start by showing you the framework that the Global Water Partnership and UNICEF started to work on already years ago. It was launched in 2015, and it has been reviewed and updated recently. What you see on the screen on the left is this framework, as I said, relaunched last year at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. And yeah, it includes now updated references to things that have happened since 2015, namely the Paris Agreement and all that has come after that. Then you see that this framework is, as you can see on the right side, is a very basic framework. It comprises 4 different stages, as you can see on the screen, which is nothing else and nothing more than understanding the problem, which is understanding the risk of climate change, identifying and appraising options. What are the options that will help us address identified risk? And here I have to say it because it's already coming in the chat box. When we appraise options, we're talking about localized impacts of climate change, things that happen in your country, in your communities, and therefore there are no silver bullets as to how can you adapt your sanitation or your water supply program, because everything is rooted in the understanding of what are the specific climate change impacts. Like we cannot come up with generic recipes. For example, if you are working in a landlocked country, obviously sea level rise is not an issue for you, right? But if you are living in Bangladesh, for example, where you are really exposed to sea level rise, you will be very interested in addressing that, right? So the concept and one of the ideas that I want to pass with this is that everything needs to be rooted in an analysis of how climate change impacts at your level. Once we've gone through understanding the problem and identifying and appraise options, this generic framework takes you into delivering solutions and monitoring and moving forward. These are 4 very key. It's what it's called in the climate jargon, the adaptation cycle. And this framework for water sanitation and hygiene just adopts this idea of an adaptation cycle and brings it into our own sector. Now, this is the perfect background to say that the guidance that is being developed right now by UNICEF at the global level, it's taking this approach with the same 4 areas of work of the adaptation cycle and digest that and gives a little bit more of a step-by-step guidance on how this framework applies to what's in school programming, right? Again, you see that now the difference with the slide before is that we do have was climate resilient development in the center is but we have was in schools in the center, and then we unpack this into 8 different steps, right? In understanding the problem, you go from conducting a stakeholder mapping exercise, right? Important here, because was in schools programming, we have a lot of stakeholders coming from ministries of education, expertise coming from ministries of water supply, sanitation and hygiene, etc. And then we move with different steps that help us understand the different options. I'm not going to cover all the steps because we only have a few minutes, but I want to concentrate on the blue and orange part of the framework, which is understanding the problem and then placing different options. Here, what you see on the screen is a good example of an analysis to understand the problem in the context of a was in schools program, right? It's a kind of an imaginary problem, a problem tree example, but certainly you will reflect that it's true in many school settings. For example, you may think that access to water in the school is discontinued during prolonged droughts, and you may start thinking what are the key causes of the problem. You may think that the borehole, you have a main borehole that in the school gets dry over over 4 months, that there is not enough water storage in the school, or that the water tracking is prioritized in other institutional settings such as healthcare facilities. If you take one of those and you go deeper, for example, there is not enough water storage in the school, you may think that water tanks are not covered and there is high temperature, so the water evaporates. The tanks have the wrong dimensions, or that actually water consumption during the hottest months increases much more than expected, and therefore there is no water. Again, if you take one of those and you try to unpack, you will start getting to the root causes. Why did we have the wrong dimensions of the water tanks? Well, maybe because the climate risks were not addressed when designing the water supply, or in your country you don't have standards, climate resilient standards for washing schools, or there is lack of capacity by implementing partners, etc. Right? So you see how a problem tree can help us go deeper and deeper understanding the root causes, and obviously this is giving us ideas later on how can we take action to overcome this. Another key part of understanding the problem is, as we have mentioned, is understanding the climate risk, right? This UNICEF GWP framework has a standalone guidance note that explains how to develop climate risk analysis and climate risk assessments that, as we have already explained before, it comprises different stages: understanding the climate hazards and the characteristics of the climate hazards, such as the frequency of the floods or the droughts, the intensity, the duration, etc. How those climate hazards expose schools and the WAS systems in the school, or the children in the school. This is the exposure level, the vulnerability, and also it is important to understand the climate risk, also to bear in mind what is the capacity, right? Here, the interesting thing to say is that higher exposure and higher vulnerability increases climate risk. Higher capacity helps reduce the climate risk, right? This is important. There is an ongoing work by GIZ and CB at the Stockholm International Water Institute to adjust this guidance note and to develop something that is more ready and easy to apply at the school facility level. Maybe Henning will say a few words around that. Since I know that there is a lot of interest into the technologies, and with the caveat that sitting in a headquarters office or from a global perspective, it's difficult to guide you exactly into what is it that you need to do specifically in your school, because again, it needs to be rooted in a specific risk analysis so that you understand the risk that you are facing, and that only can happen when you do the analysis at your local level. Bearing that in mind, obviously there are some kind of global thinking, right? When it comes to sanitation technologies, resilience is in many cases directly linked to whether water is part of the technology process, for example, the sewerage, or water is indirectly part of the sanitation system, right? Here, it's very important to understand what is the capacity of the environment to absorb or reduce the effect of the waste being, for example, disseminated through floods, right? In general terms, the risk of pollution is going to decline as the distance between the base of pit latrines, for example, and the groundwater increases. It's also very important to consider the materials that are being used in sanitation, right? For example, in a pit superstructure that needs to be adequate to the impacts of climate change. Although on-site sanitation may still be vulnerable to the damage from short and long-term flooding events, we are not going to be able to construct a super latrine that will resist absolutely everything that comes with it, right? Like a super flood or a super storm. In this case, what we need to bear in mind is that this super structure, this super latrine does not exist. What exists is a plan B and making sure that a sanitation service will be reestablished as soon as possible. And that may include considering that our existing sanitation services may be destroyed. And therefore, we need to think about a plan B, how we're going to make use of the utilities in the community, or what is the plan B in case that the worst comes to worst and the sanitation is actually destroyed. The sanitation system is destroyed. The same applies to I think there is a mistake here with sorry about that. With the heading, it should read climate resilient of water supply technologies. Apologies for that. In terms of water supply, springs, wells, and rainwater harvesting from roofs are classified as less resilient. And this is because of their vulnerability to contamination, especially during flood events or with rising groundwater levels, or as well the susceptibility to drought, right? Because there is limited storage. And there is a difficulty in preventing damage during floods. Springs are also offering little flexibility as their location is fixed and we cannot move those, obviously. There are water technological options available that are adapted for different climate risks. For example, in a water scarce or drought-prone area, the use of taps with a press function that limit on the amount of water that is released is one option, right, that you can bear in mind. However, taps should always have water-saving functions, regardless of whether they are in drought context or not. It is important to consider safely. One important thing that I wanted to mention here, both for sanitation and for water supply, is that it is important to consider that safely managed water supply, as the definition given by the Joint Monitoring Program, the higher level standard as per SDG 6.1 or 6.2, the safely managed wash services are not by default climate resilient, and the other way around. A climate resilient service may not be by default safely managed. So let's bear this in mind as well. I'm going to finish this presentation by giving you a snapshot of something that is being captured as an annex in this guidance that is being developed. It's kind of a theory of change. What you see on the screen is only the upper side of the theory of change, outlining an outcome, an intermediate outcomes and outputs, but it's accompanied below, you couldn't see because it could be too small otherwise. It's all completed by a set of generic activities that you can consider depending on your climate risk. As you see, the important thing is that the outcome here, the proposed generic outcome when you're working with WASH in schools, is that WASH infrastructure and services in school are sustainable, are resilient to climate-related risk, that the WINS interventions contribute to build community resilience, and that we lower greenhouse gases emissions. As you remember, the three objectives that we have mentioned in the previous presentation. Here is very important that we just don't think only about infrastructure, and that we also think about enabling environment at the national and subnational levels. Here, the guidance that is being developed actually makes use of the sanitation and water for all building blocks, sector policy and strategy, institutional arrangement, sector financing, planning, monitoring, and capacity development. So you may think about a lot of potential options depending on your climate risk that help you to enable climate resilient and conducive schools and WINS services. And then at the local and school level, you may then concentrate in the access and more the technological and infrastructure solutions. As it has been mentioned, you also need to focus on behavioral change, and that was the question that we got right before this presentation, and the governance as well at the local and school level. There are opportunities to work with the curricula, there are opportunities to change behaviors and to work with this approach with environmental health clubs in schools, etc. But I will leave it here for the moment, and back to you, Henning and Belinda.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. That was excellent to take us through, again, the global guidance and frameworks. And I just would like to now take the opportunity to invite the education sector. We might have some people with us in the education sector. Is Maurice Mando, are you I know you were having some tech issues. Are you able to join us now, Maurice? Maybe Maurice is still having some. Maurice, are you able to hear us? Okay, so maybe as we're trying to get Maurice on board, perhaps can we have, are there any others from the Ministry of Education from the Philippines or Reaction? Bella, are you able to join us?
Yes, I'm able to join. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
And Jeremy, I will get your question in a minute. We're just going to get some reactions and then we'll open for questions. So I see you. Bella, please, some reactions to the presentations from the perspectives of education sector. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think sorry for the noise behind me. Has been super clear presentation. Thank you so much. Very, very clear and straightforward. So, and I think very helpful. I think it's, as Henning pointed out, it's a huge task for the education sector to take on board, and so important that clarification of responsibilities and also the supporting role of the expertise, technical expertise of other sectors, because of course the education sector is not the expert on climate change, but they have to manage it within the school and have to prepare and have to integrate it into the management aspects of school. So that's very nicely explained by Henning. I think that's exactly the big challenge here. And I think the very first thing, just as from education sector perspective, in the Philippines, they've started to at least look into climate resilience, an indicator to find out what strategies do schools have, or what to connect with local government and with other stakeholders, with the important stakeholders related to climate change, and do they have communication and administrative structures to be in touch with them. And I think these are things which point into the direction how the future is and how to further work with the other sectors. But of course, the school needs exact and clear advice from other sectors, but they need to implement it. And I think you gave very clear instruction or very clear link. What are exactly the implications on school level? Thanks a lot. I think it guides very much the direction.
Yeah, thank you, Bella. And I think now he's on board. We have Maurice. So I'm just going to introduce Maurice. Maurice, can you unmute so we can just know that you're with us?
I'm on now. I believe can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you, Maurice, for joining. Just want to introduce you. Maurice is a public health professional, but he's worked with the Ministry of Health and is currently with AMREF. He's done quite a lot at a national. So when we talk about enabling environment, he's done a lot on national level. Maurice, share a little bit of your kind of experience on climate resilience and in relation to the education sector, as well as you have through the Ministry of Health worked under the Washington Schools framework. So how is it being done in Kenya? There's a lot of questions on what are specific tools, what are specific things countries are doing. Can you share a little bit with us?
Okay, thank you very much, Belinda, and to the presenters, and also for the leadership for organizing this. I have to say, in Kenya, we are still at infancy stage because we just passed a strategy recently. But what we share in common with other presenters is that this climate change is actually real. And for Kenya, we have had a series of droughts starting from 2020, moving down to now the 2023. So it's still a challenge, but we are really trying to ensure that even in the infrastructure that we are developing, we consider the climate resilience issues. Like for Kenya, after a long period of drought, we normally have like a period of heavy downpour, which results in flood. This one actually destroys a lot of the school infrastructure, most of the toilets that are there. So I think as for the designs, probably we have worked in the coastal region. We are trying to integrate what we now call the WASH resilience infrastructure, where we are now adopting designs that are flood-proof to ensure that at least we mitigate against some of these issues of, of climate change that comes with different weather patterns that are unexpected. Secondly, we have also been having issues of nutrition, and this one has also been as a result of prolonged drought, more so for the eastern and the northeastern Kenya. We are having challenges there with drought. And also what we are currently doing, currently working on kind of a strategy also to ensure that we integrate also nutrition and wash and issues of also climate change as we try to now address this. Because we realize that when we focus on one component like nutrition, becomes a challenge when we now also other issues come in like floods and prolonged drought. So we are trying to engage this into a multi-pronged approach where we are now integrating the infrastructural component to it, nutrition component to it, and the wash aspect to it, so that we minimize the adverse impacts of climate change also in schools. Probably on the gaps that we are currently experiencing, still it has not been quietly undertaken with the government. The government, I think, policy-wise, it has not still been integrated yet. So it's something that we still have a lot of advocacy work to do in Kenya, and it's something that I think its time is due, and probably we can work together also in achieving that. Thank you very much, Colin. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Maurice. For us to get really, I guess, really the feeling of the challenges from this. You mentioned in some areas there's been droughts, prolonged droughts. We know, almost humanitarian kind of levels, and then on the other side, at the coastal regions, you're having flooding. So this whole idea of having, and then also you mentioned the effects of the nutritional status. So having a coordinated multi-sectoral approach to it, and having, of course, in the case of education, to lead it would be, I guess, ideal and critical. Great. Thank you very, very much for sharing that. I think it really much contextualizes, and the fact that I think that although we are focusing, a lot of the questions seem to be focusing on the facilities. I think you've said that it doesn't just the facilities alone, it doesn't address the problem. It needs much more of a holistic approach at the enabling environment. And I think it couldn't be a better segue again to introduce Henning for a reaction before we open it up to general questions. So Henning, back again to you. Having heard a bit from Bella, a bit from Maurice, who is in Kenya, what are your reactions on what countries, again, should do, again, taking these practical steps that we've just seen in the framework? Over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Maurice. Thank you so much, Bella, and thank you so much, Jose, and of course, Belinda. I will just do a very quick reaction to what has been said, but I think the key is what we're saying here is that in order for us to identify solutions, appraise solutions, we need to first understand the problem. And the key thing to understanding the problem, the key thing for us to understand the risks, we have to ask ourselves a few questions. So firstly, we need to ask ourselves, what are the shocks and stresses? What is the likelihood or probability that they occur? What populations, what systems are exposed to these shocks and stresses, and where are they? And who is particularly vulnerable to these shocks and stresses? What is the characteristics of these people? So the framework that Jose has presented goes through these steps, but in a practical way. How can we conceptualize these risks? Well, we can do a risk analysis first on a risk analysis for the climate risks to wash in schools. And you might have heard a lot about the sort of other models that are used to understand risks. I think the most common one is the probability of the risk occurring and then the impact of the risk, and that's how you conceptualize risks. Well, this framework, the GWP and UNICEF framework, uses exactly the same thing, but it presents it in a more practical way. First, we need to understand what are the hazards. So droughts in some areas, flood in some areas, as we've heard from the previous presentation. What are the hazards? How are they affecting the schools in our country? Where are these schools located? It can be different hazards for different parts of the country, or it could be hazards that are affecting nationwide. Then we have to look at the exposed groups. What is the population? What are the types of students who are affected by these hazards? What is the type of infrastructure which is affected by these hazards? So looking at the water infrastructure and the sanitation infrastructure, and how can we make this more resilient? And also water sources. How are water sources affected by these different types of hazards? And then we have to look at the vulnerabilities. What are the aspects, what are the things that makes these exposed groups more vulnerable to these different hazards? What are the underlying vulnerabilities which we need to take into account in order to make the populations more resilient to these hazards? So we're looking at these hazards, we're looking at the exposed groups, and we're looking at the vulnerabilities. When we have looked at each of these in turn, and this can be done through a desk review. I'm sure there's a lot of background information in all of your countries on what are the different hazards that are affecting, who are the people who are most affecting, where are these schools located, and what are their underlying vulnerabilities, okay? So based on those three aspects, we're able to prioritize the key climate risks. We have to prioritize. These are the main climate risks which are affecting WASH in schools, which are affecting the individual schools, which are affecting schools on a regional level, which are affecting schools on a national level. If we understand what are the priority risks, the priority exposed groups, the priority vulnerabilities, we're able to develop solutions to reduce these risks. And these solutions need to reduce the exposure of the exposed groups and reduce the vulnerabilities. By doing that, by developing solutions based on those priority risks, we're able to reduce the exposure, reduce the vulnerabilities, and achieve more climate resilient WASH services in schools. In our experience, we have seen many common issues and areas where solutions have been developed. Political will and political leadership is a very big one, a big area where we see problems that washing schools is not high on the priority list, for example. Again, it's us as the education sector at the school level who will need to take the lead on this. In order to advocate for funding and advocate for budget lines for climate resilient washing schools, we need to show evidence and data. There, I'm sure in most countries you have data, you have some evidence on how climate change is impacting on schools. If we can show the impact that climate change has on schools and the damaging effect that this might have on the student population, on dropout rates, and the benefits of having climate resilient wash services in these schools, then we can start to advocate for improving those aspects. If we can show the budget gap, the cost of the impact of climate change, and what the budget gap is, what the financing we need is to improve these facilities, that is also a great way of doing this, to show numbers of what we actually need. Climate finance is a big aspect, what we're talking about. This methodology, the GWP UNICEF methodology, is the methodology that the Green Climate Fund in their water guidance notes is recommending. So we know that if we're using this framework, if you're using this methodology of first understanding the problem and then based on those identifying solutions, we know that we are following the Green Climate Fund and using the correct methodology for creating proposals for the Green Climate Fund. So that is a good thing that we can do. And then another aspect is understanding climate resilient technologies. Jose has been talking about this. I saw that Joanna, I think, asked the questions about these climate resilient technologies, about standards and the enforcement of standards. This is a very interesting and important aspect because we need to know what is climate resilient infrastructure. What does this look like? So I would be very interested to hear from, or you can write in the chat, if your country has developed a compendium of what is climate resilient technologies. This can be looking at what exists in the country already, which schools have already begun to develop these climate resilient infrastructure technologies, and how can other schools learn from this? This would be an interesting aspect. Capacity building is of course needed along with identifying these standards in order for masons and other people working in the service delivery to understand what are these solutions. And finally, on the question around behavior change, that being an important aspect, correct. We need to look at the infrastructure. We also need to look at the management and the governance and the service delivery to make sure that that chain is working. But we also need behavior change at the school level, not just for the students, but for the teachers as well, in order for them to take this into account and make sure this is a priority for them. Here, capacity building, ensuring that it's integrated in the curriculum, all of these things are important. Creating school clubs, climate resilient washing schools clubs, those sorts of things are important. Thank you. That's it for me. I'll hand back over to Belinda. Sorry for taking so long. Thank you.
No. We have the time, and I think it's so. I'm going to open it up now to Jeremy. Jeremy, the floor is yours. To ask your question, and the floor is all open for others if they just raise your virtual hand. So Jeremy, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, whatever. I'm a consultant based in the Philippines, but I've done work in Cambodia and Timor-Leste on washing schools, or wash and in Timor-Leste washing schools. A couple of concerns about integrated planning and where that stretches to. A little while ago, I did some work in Cambodia on commune level water and sanitation safety planning. And I used this UNICEF GWP framework, but we realized that there was a step missing to help people to understand at a local level what their water resources are and the risks and hazards to those. It needed much more information. And so we added a sort of step into that 6-step cycle, planning cycle for local or provincial level water resource understanding. So research into what the local water resources are, so that then a particular village or commune can locate itself on a map and see what are the risks of drought, what are the risks of flood, and then take that and what their water resources will provide, so that they can actually plan for that. And the planning part is the essential part of that. The other thing was integration. Timor-Leste, I did an action plan for washing schools. There was a strong conflict in a number of places between the school and the community over the water resources. So the community itself was turning off water supply to the school because they felt the school, even though the school was going to pay for it, they just didn't want the school to have it. There was a limited supply, so they turned it off, so the school doesn't get any. So their own children were suffering. But I could say more, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, super, super useful, Jeremy. Thank you for actually sharing some really concrete where there's possible gaps. I would like to bring Jose back on this idea of, not have this step on, and I think it's a really good point, having worked in Cambodia too, and knowing the very many kind of opportunities in terms of water supply, and not being able to be able to address what are the water resources. Can you kind of reflect on what Jeremy has said? And also, I think it goes back to the whole point again on understanding the situation, understanding the problem, having that holistic in place first. This is kind of what I'm getting at, the messages I'm getting from you, but maybe I'll let you say it in your words.
No, thanks, Belinda, and thanks for this intervention. First of all, it's great to see that the framework is being used and that there are reflections, right? It can be impossible to, at the global level, to come up with a magic bullet, silver bullet, right, that will solve all the answers. And getting this sort of feedback is really important to continue improving this guidance and reflecting by what happens when it's used at the local level. So, I mean, just appreciating that. As you said, Belinda, is reinforcing the idea that, again, there is no silver bullet, and everything when it comes to improving climate resilience, especially when we talk at the facility level, at the school and local level, it needs to be rooted in the reality. So we can, because otherwise we are just shooting in any direction without not knowing exactly what we are aiming at solving. That's why we have illustrated with the problem tree example, which we think is a good one, and we have emphasized the need to understand. We need to understand the climate hazards, and understanding the climate hazard goes a little bit deeper into understanding, in my school, we perceive that there are more droughts. No, but we need to understand what is the frequency of the droughts, how the frequency is changing. We need to understand more. We need to understand what is the intensity of a drought. We need to understand whether the drought season is shifting, and how is that having an impact in my particular groundwater setting where my borehole in my school is tapping the water. It is impossible at the global level that we tell you whether the response will be a borehole that is 1 meter deeper, or because it is in your own reality. It's through analysis in your own circumstances that you will find the solutions. There are no revolutionary solutions to solve the climate resilience problems. In many cases, we are going to be using the same technological things that we have always used for sanitation or water supply, but they need to be tweaked, and they need to be tweaked in a way that address these impacts that we assess, is reinforcing, adapting the things that we already know, and is the cocktail of solutions. Say that in my school, a borehole is getting dry over 4 months when it used not to be dry. Well, we will need to match and look for alternative solutions. We will need to look for a winning combination of rainwater harvesting, more storage of water in my school. Instead of one borehole, I may need two, right? It's like we need, what is the right cocktail and winning combination that at the end will ensure a continuity of the service that you have highlighted in the poll at the beginning. And again, as I have mentioned before, we have to be ready for the worst. The super flood that takes away all my sanitation systems. What do I do then? And as Jane is putting in the chat, also very important, what happens when schools become shelters, actually, for climate hazards, and the community needs to be moved into the school. We need to bear this in mind, because we know that the schools become shelters, emergency shelters, and we need to design water, sanitation, and hygiene services accordingly in case that this happens. I hope that I'm answering, but again, appreciating the feedback from the field.
Yeah, please. And please stay on. And great to have Jane Bevan with us. Love Jane. So great to have you. Before, I think there was Balkis Khan. Balkis, you had your hand up. Would love to hear from you. And then Maurice will bring you back in. So Balkis, are you still with us? Balkis Khan? Guess not. Maybe he's dropped off, unfortunately. Maurice, please come into the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Belinda, once more. I think with issues of climate change, we need to do what we call preparing for the worst and still expecting the best. And with this, I think there are also other considerations that we need to put in place side of the infrastructure. We are missing a component of the end user of some of these infrastructure that we are talking about, and that is the student. I think as much as we are designing that, we need to take into cognizance that, and then also integration of the MHM, which I've had experience with, which is in fact both during floods and during drought, because on both occasions we are having challenges of water, the water in excess or water in scarcity. So as we are trying to design, as also saying, there is no silver magic bullet, but we need to work with a combination based on the local occurrences. And then also it is important that we, as much as we are leaving it open, it is also important that we come up with the standards, most so when we talk about the infrastructure. We need to say that these should now be what we call our best. These are our bare minimum. I think when we have those two combinations, I think we will be able to tackle these issues, wash in schools, more so ranging issues of climate change globally, nationally, and regionally.
Thank you very much, Maurice, for those reflections. And I'm just thinking a little bit too, I mean, because initially, and I'm kind of missing some of the work in the chat. So if I've missed your question, you can still continue to ask questions. We've got about maybe another few minutes. And then, Jose, you've also posed a question, so I'll let you ask that for the others to get some reaction. But I guess, you know, we started the session with everybody trying to show the different facilities and our climate resilient facilities. And I think as this conversation has evolved, we realized that maybe some of these adaptations that we need rather are maybe actually things that are doable actions, whether you mentioned one, even if it's using less water or making small mitigation, small adaptations, rather than the construction of a new facility. And that again, if I understand correctly, what you're trying to say is that again comes from those little adaptations, which can do a lot, comes from again understanding the exposure, the risks, the vulnerabilities, and any investment without doing this is perhaps an investment that is not worth it, because the big flood comes, that facility, whether it's been raised or whatever it's been done, is basically rendered useless. And then I think the other point of the role of the school beyond just having the facilities, but being also there to shelter. So the school also has a service to the community. I also want to put the last point, Jeremy, about the conflict. And I think nobody's really talked about, but he did talk about the conflict that it is now creating between schools and communities as well. So that then requires this enabling environment to again address these wider issues. So lots of very interesting reflections that have come through. Please ask your question on, I think it's your question on the chat box, or is it somebody else's question? I don't know. You were posing a specific question. Was it you, Jose? Or I'm seeing something. There's a question.
We weren't getting into a conversation about whether there is research already being conducted that is telling us, you know, a little bit how specifically climate change may have impact the schools or not. I said that, and I shared on the chat box studies conducted in Kenya, for example, how droughts impact the school attendance, etc. Those are great, and I think the only issue with that one, specifically the one that I shared, is that it does not actually acknowledge the role of water, sanitation, and hygiene services. I mean, I think we have started the conversation making very clear that climate change impacts children, and by default impacts was in schools. I think this is irrefutable and there is no discussion around it. However, it's good that if we engage into this enabling environment level, right, of trying to build more evidence, for example, when research is conducted, you know, we chip in or we foster, you know, with our contacts in universities. Why not, you know, in Kenya or in other countries that are with us, you know, if there are ideas on which research is needed, we can perfectly, you know, continue researching this. We don't need to wait for action to have those research done. We We don't need to wait for that because we know it. It has an impact, but it's good that we build the evidence, you know, with what has happened, with, you know, what was the trigger for school attendance in Kenya with the droughts if water supply systems were not in place, right? I mean, just throwing this idea
So that's
there,
a clear call to action for no matter what level you're working, is to really to start to first collect and know what information there is out there for you in terms of exposure, risk, vulnerabilities, but also for us to actually start collecting it ourselves when we do see that effect, when we do see those effects. Okay, yes. Second point, yeah.
And the other point that you're making, Belinda, that I think is super important here is like, we cannot just wait for having funds for fixing all the problems just through expensive new infrastructure, just so that we get this right combination, which obviously is important. And as soon as we understand the problem, the soon we start raising the funds that we need for higher tech solutions. But the call that Belinda is making is so important, right? There are things that we can do in schools. Behavioral change, we have discussed that, and there was a question around this, like efficient use of the water, conserving water, reusing water. There are many things that can be done with are not resource intensive, like working as well with the integration of things into the curriculum, like promoting, as Jordan has done and other offices have done, like environmental and climate change clubs, so that there is a discussion among the pupils, right, as to what is this cost very little, right, like to existing health or environmental clubs to ask this aspect of climate change, what can be done. We've seen it in schools as well, like tackling issues such as deforestation. It may look a little bit far away from climate change, but it's not. I mean, deforestation and tree planting and things like that will have a positive impact in the water resources around the school. We need to understand in many cases that the water that is being tapped from a school, we need to understand it comes from outside of the school premises, right? It comes from maybe far away. Even if it's tapped underground, the underground water in the school premises comes from far away. So things that have a positive impact on the ecosystems around the school and the basin will have a positive impact as well on the school. All these things, as Belinda is calling for, can be done with little resources. It's just you know, making use of this idea of children as agents of change. And as we said at the beginning, these children, you know, if they conserve water in the school, if they reduce water in the school, will get back home to their communities and will ask their parents, why are we not conserving water or making more efficient water of at home and therefore in the community? Again, just please don't wait till you have the magic silver point or the Green Climate Fund proposal that will bring the millions, but things that can be done now. Back to you, Belinda.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent reflection. And talking about doable, sustainable, scalable actions is Bella, our 3-star approach star. Bella, the floor is yours to share a reflection.
Very, very short. I think, Jose, this is exactly the point to make, not to wait for the very big new infrastructure which will solve all. This will never happen. We will not all have the perfect and magic bullet and perfect new infrastructure which will solve all the problems. The small actions start, and then we are ready for bigger changes. But it starts right now everywhere. And I think I like very much that you say there are entry points everywhere with getting more awareness, be it integration into the curriculum, be it the clubs. Exactly. I don't need to repeat that, but also simple things. Looking that you don't waste water. That, I mean, it's always, you see that so often. Schools will just leave the tap open because the bill is paid by the governor. So it's not on the school bill, so never mind. It's not on us. So really start thinking it's not who pays the bill at the end. We all pay the bill. So we need to start everywhere. And I like this a lot. And perhaps this is exactly 3-star approach idea. First star to look at, I think currently Jose and others have started to look what would be entry points, what would be under the 3-star approach, a stepwise approach to reach national standards. What would be the respective steps for entry? And the first star would be using interventions which are really available without a lot of resources, which the school can do with the resources they have at hand. And I think to define this will be now task of education sector and others. And I think there are good suggestions already floated by experts like Jose and Henning and others. And second star would need a few more resources, also more financial resources, and third star would really be reaching a high level standards, but that's quite a long way to go. And in order to break that down and create benchmarks, I think this is something where a lot of where exactly to manage it for schools. This is needed on school level on national level to really look what are the categories under 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, because each country is different and the steps they can take are different. But the principle is most important, all schools can reach star 1 with the resources they have. This is always the start to go in. Nobody needs to wait, and I think that's important. Thanks a lot, Jose. You hit the point.
Thank you. Thank you, Bella. And I think, of course, the very first star is knowing again what your situation is, what are the hazards, what are the exposure, the vulnerability, because that's when the conversations can begin. So absolutely doable actions. We have a question from Alex, and I also see my sister Fabian is also sharing some solutions in what they do. It's small actions that are doable actions. She's also sharing that. Alex's question is really around the challenge of multiple sectors working together, this whole idea of how schools and communities can work together to provide resilient structures and services without making it a zero-sum game. And I guess it's the old age question, I guess, of how, how can education work with the other sectors? I guess it comes down to some of the fundamental, whether it's institutional structural problems we have, which is not only on climate, but others, but what things can be done? How can we get communities and schools to work together for this? Any sort of thoughts on that? And Alex, feel free to unmute and chip in too if I haven't got quite your question, but yeah. And then of course there's a question of, please, Alex. I'm glad to see you joining. Thank you.
Good to see you too. No, thank you. No, you got the question. It's really this, because I mean, looking at Washington schools, we've struggled with this for a long time, bringing education and health together, right? And now there's this massive new task of like figuring out how to really adapt for climate, for mitigating the effects of climate change, and then looking at education institutions to sort of think about, I mean, from early on, because it feels like we're still in beginning stages, right? We're sort of figuring out, doing small steps and trying to get actors to work together, talk to each other. And I mean, I'm hopeful. I'm trying to be an optimist that sectors can work together, that communities can work together, because it's not just sectors. It's also, of course, a question of like, how is a political system structured? But it's of course also looking at how difficult it is often to bring health and education together, or say the water sector and education together. I'm wondering if there's lessons learned, or the reverse, lessons learned of what didn't work, and maybe we have to do better in order to make this work and make sure that it's not just on the Ministry of Education that usually doesn't have the budget to actually do a lot. I mean, apart from, of course, the things that don't cost a lot, but even things like training, awareness raising, maintenance costs, and so on, these things need to be covered, and very often we see that they're not, unfortunately.
Thank you for that. So Jose, it's over to you to take those reflections. Thanks a lot, Alex. And then just as we are sort of closing the session, I will also ask Henning if you want to say some last thoughts. Yep, please go ahead, Jose.
Perfect. Now we are diving in. Now that we have stimulated, things to happen, we already start to see what will be the challenges, right? And I completely agree. Washington Schools programming, we all know, is complex by nature because there are so many different stakeholders involved: education, health, WASH, and now we are making it even a little bit more complicated by saying that we also need to work with climate stakeholders. It is true, but it's in this case, having, whether it's the climate stakeholders working with us or understanding where do we need their thinking or their information to so that we can make use, it will be essential, right? Because who is going to have the information on whether the droughts are becoming more frequent or more intense? Those are going to be meteorological departments and institutions, within different ministries that maybe we have not been working with closely. So yeah, it's adding a little bit of a layer, but let's not make stakeholders and colleagues attending here afraid of that, because I think that the essence is that there are things that can be done, right? I just want to illustrate what you're saying, Alex. Is also true the other way around. Like climate stakeholders, when you penetrate into climate discussions, they're also having the same issue, because climate stakeholders, they need to cover transportation, water, energy, and many different sectors. In many cases, what they do is they prioritize action, at national and subnational level, that is not being consulted with the different sectors, name education or water, etc. And the frustration for climate colleagues is that sometimes they think that they have come up with their priorities and they don't see them implemented because there is no ownership by education or health or water sectors. Again, it's just a matter of working better together, right? I mean, Henning has made a call on how we need to influence climate strategies at the national and subnational level. Maybe this is an easy step, like trying to understand better from our side, education, water, what is a national adaptation plan in my country? What does the nationally determined contribution say in my country? And how can we knock on the door of these climate stakeholders to make our cases heard and then break a little bit the ice and start working together? I hope that I'm adding a little bit a positive note to the discussion. Belinda?
Yeah, sorry. Whoops. I'm pressing all kinds of slides. Let me go back here. We're still in the polls. Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much for really, I think I've taken a lot from this myself, and I'm also inviting everybody to share as we kind of close this session. Henning, in about 30 seconds, any kind of last thoughts?
I'll be super quick. Thank you very much to all of the all of the speakers. Yeah, so just highlighting the need for accountability and ownership by the education sector at the national level, at the regional level, but also at the individual school level. We need political will. We need leadership in order to address these issues. But this leadership, we don't have to wait for leadership to come from the national government level or the Ministry of Education. This leadership can come from the individual school level. That's where we have to start. We started by schools. We learn from what other schools are doing. We see what resources we have available and do what we can with that. And then from that on, we build it up to a municipal level, to a local government level, to the national level. At the same time, we need to advocate. We need to advocate for budget for climate resilient Washington schools. We need to advocate for this to trickle down all the way down to the local level. The 3-star approach is a great starting point for this. Thank you to everyone who have spoken. Great session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let's keep the conversations going. Yeah, so just to do a little bit of plug-in, many of you who will be in Stockholm, or if you're not, you can join us online. We will be actually unpacking the International Learning Exchange, which has actually been a vehicle for sharing and exchanges, including the climate change. So we will, and climate resilient wins. So we will be having a session, all welcome there. It is a free session, so check it out on the Stockholm. So Henning with the Seaweed, so Seaweed to Seaweed kind of, Stockholm World Water Week. It's all free this year, online sessions, so please do join. I think there will be lots of very rich materials for that. And for those of you who ask me, I still get messages on this. How do I join the WINS network? You can join, scan this code, and yeah, you can become either as an individual or as an organization as Marge mentioned early, please do join, get the information. This presentation, this recording, as well as the links to all of the core documents, frameworks will be on the website. So it's a one-stop shop for all of this. But again, thank you all for excellent inputs, reflections. Jeremy, Maurice, Alex, I can't say them all. Many, many, many thanks also to Henning and to Jose for an excellent presentation. And of course, Bella. Thank you all and wishing you guys a great day. Thanks. Bye-bye.